right. Hey, everyone. Welcome to the podcast. Our guest for today's LinkedIn Live is Scott Sambucci. He's the founder and CEO of SalesQualia, where he specializes in helping enterprise technology startups scale their revenue and sales teams. So, this is going to be exciting. He's got 25 years of experience in enterprise sales and has been instrumental in building repeatable and scalable sales processes. He's also the author of Stop Hustling, Start Scaling, and a speaker at TEDx and the Lean Startup Conference. Welcome, Scott. Scott,
Thank you.
really excited to have you here.
Absolutely thrilled to be here. Thanks for having me on the show.
Right. So we will jump right into it.
Let's do it.
Um, Tell us a little bit about your career with enterprise sales, marketing, and product management.
Yeah.
What's the journey so far, and how did you find Sales Qualia?
Yeah, great question. I'll do the relatively short version. So out of college, I was a history major, which means I was unemployable except for basically sales or working at a museum. So I was fortunate enough to wear down a sales manager at a company called Prentice Hall, which is now Pearson Education, and got myself a job selling college textbooks to university. So if you remember in university, whenever you tried to return back a used book and the bookstore said, no, we're not taking that book back anymore because there's a new edition, I was the guy that was selling the new edition.
Right.
So I basically that first year, I just dedicated myself. I was like 22, single, work from home on an outside sales job, and I literally read one sales book every week. I would go to Barnes and Noble, buy a book, read that book, and ended up having a really good year. I was number one in my discipline, number 5 in the company overall. So this is going back 25 years. So back then, the company was like, "Wow, who's this young kid that he's just like doing this great sales work?" And I started actually doing training for our local district. And back then I was like, wow, this is kind of fun. Like I enjoyed it. So fast forward, a few years and I was out in Silicon Valley doing sales. And as I was working with startups, what I realized is that a lot of founders out there, especially enterprise tech founders, they've had this like wonderful idea for a product. They're solving a huge problem for the kinds of companies that they're selling to. And a lot of times they had their own personal experience with that problem. They might have worked at a bank, they might have worked at a hospital, they might have worked at a pharmaceutical company, and like, wow, somebody's got to modernize the tech stack, and that someone's going to be me. And so they had this great product solving an important problem, bringing a lot of value, but they were just missing, like, how do I actually sell to the enterprise? Oftentimes thinking it's some kind of like magical black box thing. And so what I realized is like, well, sales, you use the word process a lot in my introduction. Like sales is really just a process. So as a founder of a company, we even use the words like the fundraising process, the engineering process, the product development process, the hiring process, the management process. Everything's a process in a company. Sales is no different. It's not like sales is some weird part of your business. Sales is just another set of systems that need to be developed and installed and documented and followed. And that's where I started doing workshops out in Silicon Valley, just kind of teaching other founders what I was learning as I was working in startups. That led to a couple workshops, led to a couple people after the workshops asking me if I did coaching. Did that enough times over 3 or 4 years as kind of a side gig, where there was a point where I'm like, hey, there's actually a business here. And so I stepped away from being the leader of a sales team at a startup to now coaching and consulting with startups all over the world.
Great. So tons of experience. Scott, like off the bat, how do you go from 0 to 1? How do you go from 1 to 10? What's the
Yeah.
secret sauce? Like,
Yeah.
which,
And I'm assuming you're talking about revenue, 0 to 1 million in revenue,
yes,
1 to
and 1 to
10.
10,
Yeah.
right? Like ARR revenue, either of the two.
Yeah.
Um, Founders and for like people who are scaling businesses in this tough environment,
Yep.
what does
Yep.
work? Like, give us the goss.
Yeah. So one of the frameworks I teach all the time to the founders that come to our workshops and that we work with in our coaching program, we call this going from founder led to founder less selling. Now, the less doesn't mean without the founder; it just means less of
Yeah,
the founder being involved.
I
And
like it.
so, what that means from in the context of 0 to 1, 1 to 10, that first, not even the first million, even, but even the first 10 customers, that's not even founder led. That's founder everything
Yeah,
sales. Like literally the founder is on LinkedIn, using network, going to conferences, sending prospect emails, booking meetings, running the meetings, doing the follow-up emails, doing the negotiations, doing the onboarding, doing the customer support at the kitchen table at night. It's like founder everything. CEO at that stage means chief everything officer.
Yeah.
You've got to do it yourself. It's like this concept, it's like concept of extreme ownership that some people have heard that term before. Like nobody else is going to help you figure this out. You as the founder need to figure this out. And by rapid experimentation, doing the selling yourself, that's how you start to figure out a little bit, not even like a full operational sales process and a playbook, but it's more of like, okay, like in my industry, if I go to these 3 conferences, those are where the people that I need to talk to are going. And if
Right.
I send these kinds of emails with this value proposition to those kinds of people, I can get a meeting. And then when I'm in the meeting, these are the questions I should be asking to discover the real need. And so over time, you start to kind of put together a little bit of a structure. And that's where you go from founder everything to founder led, because now you can start leading a small team of people. It might be a couple of SDRs that are helping you with account development and business development and lead gen. It might be some customer success people on the back end helping you with customer support. But you're probably still leading the sales effort. So that's going to be in your basically your 0 to 1, and even from like 1 to 3 million in revenue. Once you get to about 3 million in revenue, a couple of things will change. Like one is over the repeatable nature of you over and over doing sales, you'll start to fine tune. Okay, this is the lead gen strategies that we take. This is how we do customer discovery. This is how we do our demos. This is how we price. This is how we implement. This is how we onboard. This is how we service.
Yeah.
To a point where now there should be enough sales, enough leads happening that you can't do it all. And that's where you go to founder less. And that's when you start hiring a team of account executives. At that point, you're probably hiring a VP of sales, your first VP of sales at that basically around that $3 million mark. And that VP of sales should be getting you from the 3 to 10. And then the multiples from there are like 10 to 30, 30 to 100, 100 plus. So that's how we think about it. It's like starts with founder everything, goes to founder led, and then goes to founder less.
Right. No, and you make it sound easy, right? Like uh, 0 to
Simple,
3,
simple,
3
not
to
easy.
10 to 100, right? But like which, like you said, like use the emails, get the meetings. Any thoughts on everyone is saying emails are getting lower and lower
Mhm.
response rates because of all the GPT, and everyone can write a well-crafted email,
Yeah,
right? So like what's working in today's day and age, like as a founder who's going from 0 to 1 or like
yeah.
1 to 3, what would be your advice to them? Like what's
That's a really good question. I'm glad you asked that because I think a lot of times founders in that 0 to 1 phase, they tend to focus on sales activity that is designed for later stage companies. So you mentioned email as an example. So everyone talks about email and outbound prospecting and, do your outbound, do your emails, do your LinkedIn, do your phone calls. The challenge with doing outbound emails in that 0 to 1 phase is that the only way for an email to be effective is for you to, number one, know exactly who are your target accounts, like what kinds of companies are we selling to? Because
right?
if you're selling an enterprise solution, it may well be over time you could sell to banks and insurance companies and healthcare providers and a bunch of other industries. There's
Mhm.
probably a TAM in the billions. But for now, when you're first starting out, you got to figure out like what's the kernel, what's that ideal customer profile. I know you
Yeah,
talk about this on your website all the time. What's your ICP?
yeah,
Because until you dial in your market and you dial in the right people at those companies and understand what they're responding to and what the real problem is, until you know those things, you actually can't do outbound effectively. Because, like, are you going to email the world and every executive and just like batch and blast out emails hoping you get a meeting? That's not going to work. And so, for that 0 to 1 phase, what I always tell our founders is like, assumably, you started this company because you have experience in an industry. So you probably have network. You probably have people you could call on to introduce you or could directly be customers. So you've got network, you've got referrals. Events can be really effective because you can be very targeted about this event is an insurance business and those insurance executives that we want to target are going to be there. So I can just line up 20 meetings for myself in 3 days. So a lot of it is just more like owning the process from within. What
right,
do I know and who do I know first? Then as you start to develop your message and your targeting and you figure out what the value is that you're bringing in the problem statements, now you've got the kernel of information you need in order to build an effective outreach strategy with good messaging so that outbound can work. So for
right,
most of our companies we coach, we tell them don't do outbound until you have at least 10 customers and probably until you get to the first million in revenue. Outbound in some ways is going to be a lower rate of success than doing the other type of sales development work.
And the other type, like you mentioned, would be know your ICP really well, probably go through some warm intros or referral
Mhm.
networks. Would that be the
Yeah.
case?
So warm. So for example, especially if you're selling enterprise, another way to think about entering into big organizations is through partners like consulting companies. Now it could
Yeah.
be, we like to think about Deloitte and Accenture and all of those huge consulting companies. Those are enterprises in themselves and hard to navigate. But if you can find even smaller consulting companies that are already working with the C-suite or the executive suite at those target accounts, now if you get an introduction from them or you figure out how to co-sell, where they're going to sell the consulting piece and you're going to sell the technology piece that they're going to help implement,
Yeah.
now you're sliding into that room of executives that otherwise you may never, or at least it would take a really long time for you to get in from a cold standpoint. So
Great.
partnerships like that and channel partnerships can be really effective. Not that
Yeah.
you're going to rely on Deloitte or Accenture or PwC to do the selling for you. You're
Yeah.
just looking for them to crack the door open and get you in the room so that you can explain your value proposition and show that, say, bank executive how you might be able to help them.
Sure. And Scott, I'll just dig a little deeper here, right? Like partner channel is super critical, but like early stages, even 1 to 10, right? Why do they listen to you? How do you get them, convince them to actually partner with you? Like first,
Yeah.
how do you find them? Then how do you convince them
Mhm.
to do the sale? Like early on that journey, like just share some nuggets with us.
Yeah, yeah, great question. So part of it is like treating your prospecting for a partner just like you would treat your prospecting for your target account. Meaning that, let's take a huge organization like Accenture, and I'll use banking as a sector because that's where I have a lot of personal experience. So
Sure.
within this monolith of Accenture, there is a team of people that focuses on the banking sector, and more specifically, they're people that focus on, say, community banks or people that focus on the top 20, largest banks in the U.S. So those people are going to conferences just like you are. And so when looking at, you sign up for the conference, you get access to the mobile app, go find those consultants and figure out who they are and get that initial meeting with them. Explain what you do, first of all, and what's in it for them. So it's not that, hey, Karan, I saw you're a consultant at Accenture. I'd love to meet with you so you can sell my stuff for me. Like that's not going to work. But if instead you think in what they care about, well, they care about billable hours. They care about value to the customer. They think about stickiness to their end client. So you position just like you would a sales pitch to a big company, you would position that conversation to the consultant and say, look, one of the things we know is that as a consultant, you're often making recommendations around technology.
Mhm.
And sometimes, you're not the software company that's actually going to implement. But this is a case where if you brought us in as a partner to be one of the solutions you would recommend, or bring us in as an authority voice, and maybe there's a certain part of, say, in banking right now, digital onboarding is a huge issue right now. Customer retention is a huge issue right now. Getting new deposits from consumers is a huge issue right now. And if your company happens to have a solution that helps with those things, then you tell the consultant, like, why don't you have us come in? We can even do like a 2-hour workshop
Mhm.
for your end client about innovations when it comes to customer onboarding, retention, and getting new deposits, so that you're adding value to that relationship and you're getting in the door in a high value way and an education way, not just based on, hey, I got this product I want to pitch you. So
Right.
you want to, just like anything, you want to enter, you want to position what you're doing in the mind of who you're talking to, so they go, this is how it's going to help me, because we're all
Right.
very selfish,
Yeah.
right?
No,
Nobody does
absolutely.
things
You know,
altruistically.
one challenge I've seen founders face is, hey, I don't even know if you're going to be around next year. Like, why
Mhm.
should I bring you to any of my customers? Right? Like again,
Fair
early
point.
stage, you don't have the bank balance, you don't have like
Mhm.
the scale, which kind of sometimes, at least, especially for the big four, right? Like Accenture, Deloitte.
Sure, and that's why I would say, like, just targeting the Big Four. I'm using Accenture as an example, but there's plenty of, like, I was at a conference, an insurance conference called Insure Tech Connect or Insure Tech Connect or something in New York back in May. And one of the people that was on the mobile app was a guy who was recently had left a very large insurance company. He was like a CIO or CTO of a business division there. And he also had a history. He worked not just at one large insurance company, he actually, over the course of his career, 30 years, he worked at 4 large insurance companies. So these are companies like USAA, Allstate, like, companies from TV commercials.
Yeah.
But he recently left the corporate world to do his own consulting business.
Mm.
And so that kind of person, I was like, hey, saw that you have this big experience. One of the things that we're doing here at I was at the conference on behalf of NayaOne, a company I'm consulting for. This is one of the problems that we're solving. I'm curious to know if you hit those problems when you were running tech organizations. And if it is, I'd love to grab a few minutes to share what we do and talk about how we might be able to help each other out.
Yeah.
So that's a case where it's like an individual, it's a guy who put a shingle up, got tons of experience. Through that meeting, it led to introductions because he's like, oh, now I understand what you do. I can introduce you to this person at USAA or that person over at Aflac or this person at Allstate. So now I have somebody who's like more approachable and easier, who's also still trying to spin up their own business and
Yeah.
sees value in working with somebody like us because now he has a unique value proposition he's bringing in because he's showing tech to those companies that they haven't seen before, which is very different than hiring McKinsey or Accenture and paying them $1,000 an hour for a bunch of PowerPoints.
That makes so much sense. So you're basically saying find freelancers who have been in that industry,
Mm-hmm.
who are now probably just moving to a consulting kind of role and can make the right introductions.
Yeah, another person I met, she actually does digital marketing. So she writes copy and content specifically for the insurance business because she's a 20-year executive. Same situation. She stepped away from her corporate job a couple of years ago. She has her own agency now, and she's successful at that. I was like, hey, is there a way for us to collaborate on this? And so
Yeah.
those are the kinds of people at the lowest level, at the sort of like what's realistic when you're in that 0 to 10 phase or that, $0 to $1 million phase. Those are the ones that would be more likely to pay attention. And then nothing draws a crowd like a crowd, right? So then you get that second or third big logo, and maybe you have USAA and Wells Fargo and, say Aflac as your early paying customers, even if it's a small implementation. Now, when you go to the Accenture person or the Deloitte person, you're like, hey, these are 3 of our customers right now. Yeah, we're small. However, we're clearly getting traction from the kind of companies that you are working with, and they're going to hear about us one way or another. So wouldn't it be better for them to hear about us from you? Because then you'll get the credit, you'll be the hero. And we don't care how they hear about us. We just want a foot in the door to go talk to those executives.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, Scott. Uh, One more, like, actually, I have 2, 3 good questions for you, or at least I think they're good. So
Yeah,
one is, uh, you obviously work with a lot of startups or founders.
sure.
Uh, what what have you seen as the secret to success between someone who takes the same advice and really hits it big versus someone who could not make it? Obviously, there could be market factors, but like if you have to boil it down to internal company related factors,
Yeah.
right? What has been your learning?
Um, So you're right. I mean, there's definitely market factors that are out of people's control that can have a major impact on success, right? I think it was Vinod Khosla. I've heard him say, startups are like 70% luck, 15% timing, and the rest is just like actually the product or the team or some sort of, I'm paraphrasing. So there's definitely a lot of luck involved. However, what you got to do, I always think about like, how do I reduce my variables? Anything I'm doing, whether I'm doing like an ultra run, like a long distance race, or I'm doing business work, sales work, I'm like, I know there's a lot of unknowns. There's a lot of variables that could cause me to be successful or fail. Some of those variables are out of my control, like market conditions, interest rates, whatever. But the things that are in my control, what am I doing to get my arms around that and being able to have some way of swaying the direction? And so to your question, I think at the end of the day, it's the teams that we coach that are successful are the ones that actually implement. So one of my mantras with clients is implementing equals learning. Because like if we sit down and you and I are in a coaching call and I say, okay, you've got this conference coming up in 2 months time. Here's your conference selling strategy. Here's what you should do 8 weeks out, 6 weeks out, 4 weeks out, 2 weeks out, the day of, at the conference, after the conference. Like here's the playbook. Here's what you've got to do in order to be successful. The difference is the people who actually go implement the strategy and the people who don't. Because I see too often people are like, oh, this is great. I've got this conference. I'm going to do this. And then as we follow up with them and go, how'd the conference go? It's like, we didn't get many meetings. I'm like, well, did the playbook not work? Like when you sent the messages out 2 weeks before, to confirm the meetings. Like, what did they say? I'm like, well, actually, I didn't get the meetings booked. Like you said, I should have 4 to 6 weeks ahead of time. So by the time I emailed everybody, they all said that they were busy or they didn't want to meet. I'm like, okay. So then I went to the conference and I tried to catch up with people I could, and I tried to bump into some folks. And I talked to like 2 or 3 kind of like good people, but it wasn't as good as I hoped. And it wasn't that the conference was bad, is that they didn't follow the process.
Right.
So like I talk about this all the time. It's like, do your thing and do it well. Because it's so like as a founder, you're already stretched thin.
Yeah.
And it's easy to, squirrel, shiny red ball. I got to do this. I got to do that. Investor needs a PowerPoint from me. The product team person, we got to hire someone. The engineering team is hit a major bug with, AWS implementation. One of our 3 customers is having a major hiccup. Like, you're having all that stuff happen.
Yeah.
So if you want to be successful, you got to be able to prioritize and say, okay, if over the next 2 months, this conference is the thing that we're kind of banking on for this quarter as being our lead generation strategy, because we don't have time to do the other things, I better be damn sure that I execute on that one thing. Because if I
Right.
don't execute on that conference selling strategy, it's exactly the same as telling your engineers, don't worry about fixing the bugs, or to your product people, don't worry about adding new features to the roadmap, or telling your HR people, don't worry about making payroll. If you're ignoring something that's fundamental to the business, you're not going to be successful, whether it's sales or any other part of the business. So what it comes down to is people that follow the process, follow it through, and then learn from it to figure out how they make it better the next time.
No, that makes so much sense. And Scott, on the event side, right? Like we actually have one module, shameless plug here, which is like, hey, let's get the attendee list, enrich that, qualify that against your ICP, and those who are net new qualified, reach out to them with personalized messaging, uh,
Yep.
and pre-book meetings. And Sprouts is like automating that whole process, like the whole workflow, right? But
Yeah, there's so many tools available to make it easy.
yeah,
It shouldn't, you're not hiring the robots to do the work for you. You're hiring the robots to help you do the work that needs to be done
exactly.
effectively and efficiently.
Yep. And
Right?
this question, right? Like you said, focus and implement. I saw you are like a ultra marathon
Yeah.
runner, right?
Yeah.
And you obviously are like fit and well built, and you
Thank
have
you.
this calendar. No, no, absolutely. I like it's an aspiration to get to some level of where you're at in terms of fitness, right? And how, and also like you talked about this calendar where you have like this color coded stuff. Like how does
Mhm.
the whole fitness and discipline impact your day-to-day work? And for founders, right, like we're always scattered, we're always doing 20,000 things.
Yeah.
How do you focus, how do you bring this discipline and that dogged one-mindedness to get things done?
Um, so one, I've got a lot of personal aspirations, right? I like to do ultra running, and if I do a race, I want to do it well. I want to be a good dad, so I spend time with my son, and I coach a soccer team, and I don't want to just coach the team. I want the team to do well. I want to be a good partner with my wife, so I don't want to just like hang around and be in the house. I want to do fun things. Business, I want to have a good business that grows. I want to help clients. And so when you start thinking about all those things we're trying to do every day, there's a lot of stuff that we want to do. So one is like prioritizing what's the most important thing to me in this day, week, month, quarter, whatever. Both the discipline piece and the calendaring that I talked about in this blog post, and I've talked about in different podcasts. What this comes down to is just really understanding how much time it takes to do things well. So as an example, like if I know in my training regimen that part of my training, if I'm gearing up for a big race on a Saturday, I'm going to have to go out and do a 20-mile run. Now, a 20-mile run, in order for me to get to a place where I can do a 20-mile run with some hills, at least from where I live, it's like a good hour drive. And so in order to be at the place to start the run at 5 o'clock in the morning, I got to wake up at 3:30. And I wake up at 3:30, I get in the car, I have all my stuff packed from the night before. So all I have to do is throw it in the truck and then get out there and meet my friends and do that 20-mile run that we said we were going to start at 5. And then that run that goes 20 miles is probably going to take about 5 hours. So now that brings me to whatever, like 10 o'clock in the morning, maybe 10:30, and then I got to drive home. I got to account for that drive home as well. So that 20-mile run is not just the 5 hours. That 20-mile run is really like 8 to 10 hours.
Yeah.
And so I put that in my calendar, and I tell my wife, like, like, she doesn't care I get up at 3:30 because she doesn't get up till 7 on a Saturday, right? So she's like, whatever, you're not here, I'm sleeping. But it's when am I coming home? Because she has things she wants to do. Like we own a couple horses. That's her passion. She loves to go out to the barn. She wants to know, when am I going to be back so that she can go to the barn, so that my son isn't left home by himself for too long. He's 12, he can manage himself, but he doesn't need to be home all day, right? Who's going to do what? So it's like creating those buffers and knowing exactly how long things actually take. And what that means for enterprise sales specifically. I see this mistake over and over. It's the same kind of principle around this conference selling strategy, where it's like, oh, I didn't do the prep and I just kind of showed up to the conference, and I tried to bump into some people and it wasn't that good. We'll take that down to a single sales call. What if you have a 30-minute sales call with an executive at Wells Fargo that you met from this conference? That sales call is not 30 minutes. Like, basically multiply it by 10. So every significant sales call is probably 10 times the time that you need in that meeting. So, like, for me, a 60-minute phone call is probably a minimum of 6 hours of preparation.
Yeah.
Right? So, like, I've done this, like, recently on behalf of clients. I'm doing these big major, like, sales calls for large banks and large insurance companies. Like, we might schedule that 1-hour meeting, and that meeting, by the time we get to 2 or 3 or 7 executives in the room at the same time, we might not be able to schedule that for at least 3 or 4 weeks out. So everybody's traveling and everybody's on vacation, and I'm on PTO, and I got this thing and I'm not available. So we're sitting here August 20th. It might be September 21st before we finally get a chance to get all those people in a room. Now, if I wait until the morning of September 21st and be like, oh, I got to get ready for this meeting, that meeting's going to fail. A couple of reasons it's going to fail is, one, of the 7 executives, 4 or 5 of them are going to cancel that day. Like, oh, I looked at my calendar and I realized I'm double booked. I can't make it. So now you're down to 2 or 3. Then you get on the call and you ask stupid, silly questions that you could have figured out on your own. Like, hey, tell me about, like, what's your focus there at Wells Fargo? It's like, really? Is that what we're going to do with this time? So that 1-hour meeting that's a month out, I use that as, like, this concept of gift of time. It means I have 4 weeks to get on that call and be ready. So what I should be doing, and what I need to do to make that 1-hour call successful in 4 weeks' time, is, number one, I need to connect with each of those 7 people individually. Connect with them literally on LinkedIn, but also send them an email. Say, hey, Bob, Sarah, Jill, saw that you're going to be joining us for that meeting in a couple of weeks out. Could we schedule 15 to 20 minutes so I can understand more about your specific perspective on the problem that we're looking to solve and how our platform works, so that I can make sure in that meeting we make the most of your time?
Sure.
I have almost never had anybody say no. I've had people either not respond to that email, or they say, look, I'd love to, I'm super jammed. Karan set up the meeting, he filled me in with everything, I'll be ready to go.
Right.
So now I've made that touch point, right? Then I should be sending confirmation emails a couple days out. Hey, got this meeting on the calendar for the 21st. Want to make sure we're still good to go. That way, if there's a chance for them to get double booked, they've already told me that they're going to go. So now the second meeting that comes that could double book over mine, they go, oh, I've already committed to this other meeting. Now that's the other meeting that gets rejected, not my meeting. And then third thing I'm doing, is thinking about that warm-up sequence. What can I do to help them get excited, create anticipation? How am I communicating with them? It's sending them articles from the industry. It's sending them LinkedIn posts. I'm researching them. I can't tell you how many times I've researched an executive at a bank and found that they were either a speaker at a conference, were hosted on a webinar panel, have been interviewed on a podcast. And these might be little tiny podcasts that you've never heard of, like, digital banking payments for international transfers. It's like, maybe there's 1,000 people that listen to that podcast, but they were a guest. And even if they were a guest 2 years ago, I'll go, hey, Bob, listen, by the way, I listened to your episode where you were interviewed on that podcast from a couple of years ago. I really appreciate how you said this, this, and this.
Yeah.
These are all the things you've got to do before that 1-hour meeting.
Love it.
If you don't do them, you're not going to have a good meeting. By the time you get to the meeting, those people should feel seen. They should feel like there's a reason for them to be there. They should feel like they know you. And that meeting is getting down to business and figuring out, how do we assess whether or not your technology is going to help me solve my business problem.
Wow, Scott, this is brilliant. Like, this is one of the best inputs I've heard. And I had few questions. I know we're running out of time, but I want to ask you this one follow-up question on this. How do you do this at scale? Like, as you're bringing 50, 100, 200 enterprises, this takes a lot of work, a lot of effort, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like 10 people per organization into 100 is like 1,000, 2,000 people. Obviously, there'll be a team, but how do you build this culture of in-depth research-led like sales motion?
It's like, first of all, as a founder, you're doing it, right? You've got to set the example and set the standard and say, like, this is how we do things here. Because if we're going to try to sell $1 million deal to Wells Fargo, it's not going to happen with like a cold email and a demo.
Yeah.
You got like 18 months of slogging through 50 people at Wells Fargo to get everybody's buy-in in order to make this happen. So number one, it's like, this is the standard.
Yeah.
Number one. Number two is, I don't think about it as like, how do I scale it? It's like, how do I grow it? It's easy to go like, like, how do I get from me to 10 salespeople to 100? How am I going to do this if I need to, instead of closing 5 accounts this year, like that's my target for this year. How do I get to 5 accounts a month? Right? That's the scale piece. Well, like, focus on now and worry about later. The now is, how do I get it from me doing 5 accounts in a year to teaching someone else so that they can do 5 accounts in a year, or maybe teaching 2 people how they can each do 5 in a year. And if I can do that effectively, because if I can't do that effectively, I can't even get 1 person or 2 people to repeat what I can do, I got problems. I'm never going to get the scale, because it's always going to be founder everything, and that doesn't scale, and that's not going to grow. So it's like, think incrementally. Okay, in the next year, can I get 2 or 3 salespeople each to do 5 deals? And if I can get that, my revenue is going to grow. I'm going to show my investors that I have the ability to begin scaling this thing. And then you go, okay, now I got 3 people. How do I get those 3 to teach 3 people of their own? How do I get to 10 sales reps in the next 18 to 24 months?
It's really
If you
building
keep
that
doing that
culture.
incrementally, it's like running,
Yeah.
right? If I'm going to go run 100 miles, I don't sign up for a race and be like, oh my God, how am I going to run 100 miles in 6 months? I'm like, how do I go run 20 miles this week for training? How do I go do 4 5-mile runs between now and next Sunday? Let me do that. And then the week after that, how do I do 24 miles? How do I start doing some weightlifting? How do I start working my way up over time and just week to week, focusing on the training for that week? And incrementally it grows to the point where now I can knock out a 100-mile race and run 100 miles in 24, 25, 26 hours. It didn't happen overnight. It's incremental improvements.
Right. And final 2 questions. One is stop hustling, start scaling.
Yeah.
What are like the top 3 insights from the book?
Top 3 insights. So the title of the book, Stop Hustling, Start Scaling, is referring to this whole concept. Like, at the early stage, you have to hustle. It's hustle, grind, grit, founder everything, kitchen table, LinkedIn, begging friends for meetings. Like, that's just the way it is. That's how you get from 0 to 1. But you do need to start scaling, right? And so a couple of the key things that I talk about in the book is really about, number one, how do we get repeatable revenue before you get scalable revenue? So most startups think about, well, there's startup, and then I get some investment money, and then I'm told by the investors, go scale. Well, it's actually skipping a step. There's a step between startup and scale up. It's called ramp up. And the ramp up phase is about documenting your process, understanding what works, understanding what doesn't work. Just like an engineer, when they're coding, in their documentation of their code, they write down all the things they tried that didn't work. And then they go, this is the code fix that actually did work. It's the same with your sales process. That ramp up phase is about how you go from 1 founder to 1 or 2 salespeople, from 2 salespeople to 4 salespeople, 4 to 6. Then you're going to be ready to scale. So I think the biggest takeaway in this book, if there was just one thing, is like, there's not startup and scale up. There's startup, ramp up, then you scale up, and you can't skip steps.
Right. Right. And your favorite marketing tools, like sales and marketing tools, which you've used, which you think are super valuable?
I mean, first one for me is LinkedIn. It's just
Right.
insane how easy it is to find information, not just to connect with people, but, reading their posts. What are they linking to? When you see a post from an executive that tags 5 other people on their team, hey, I just want to thank these 5 people for joining me at this conference or joining me for this session that we ran at this workshop. It's like, oh, I just got the names of 5 more people in the organization that I probably should follow up with. So I love that. There's a plugin called the org.com, which is great because it's not 100% accurate, but it gives you some context. It's like
Yeah.
what you do is when you open up a LinkedIn page, it shows you where that person sits in the organization or where they report up to. So
Yeah.
that's really helpful. I mean, those are like basic things that I use. I mean, I've used outbound software. I've definitely used software like yours that helps to do a lot of like the core research and to what's the word that you use to describe how you're filling in information?
Uh, like net new qualified enrich. Uh,
Enrich. Yes,
enrich.
that's the word I'm looking for.
Yeah.
So I think those kinds of tools are hugely helpful just from an efficiency standpoint. Like if I can have a list of these are my top 50 bank accounts that I'm targeting, and these are 10 executives that I think are the right fit. Like, let me just pop them into a platform that can just enrich that information, get their email address, their LinkedIn address, understand more about them, so that I'm not spending time clicking through on spreadsheets. So those, I mean, that's how I think about it. More so than marketing tools, it's just like, what are basic sales tools that make my life easy and give me insights about the customers that I want to target?
Okay. Thanks, Scott. This has been an amazing session. I love
Good.
the insights, and yeah, look forward to keeping in touch.
Thanks so much for having me on the show.